Okay, we're taking up at Canto 3, Chapter 33, text number 9, if I'm not incorrect. Does that sound good? Yes. Thus the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila, satisfied by the words of his mother, towards whom he was very affectionate, replied with gravity, "Since the Lord is all perfect, his exhibition of affection for his mother was also complete. After hearing the words of his mother, he most respectfully, with due gravity and good manners, replied." The Personality of Godhead said, "My dear mother, the path of self-realization which I have already instructed to you is very easy. You can execute this system without difficulty, and by following it, you shall very soon be liberated, even within your present body." Purport: devotional service is so perfect that simply by following the rules and regulations and by executing them under the direction of the spiritual master, one is liberated. As it is said herein, from the clutches of Maya, even in this body. In other yogic processes or in empiric philosophical speculation, one is never certain whether or not he is at the perfectional stage. But in the discharge of devotional service, if one has unflinching faith in the instruction of the bona fide spiritual master and follows the rules and regulations, he is sure to be liberated, even within this present body. Srila Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu has already confirmed this. Iha yasya haridasya. Regardless of where he is situated, anyone whose only aim is to serve the Supreme Lord under the direction of the spiritual master is called Jivan Mukta, or one who is liberated even with his material body. Sometimes doubts arise in the minds of neophytes about whether or not the spiritual master is liberated. And sometimes neophytes are doubtful about the bodily affairs of the spiritual master. The point of liberation, however, is not to see the bodily symptoms of the spiritual master. One has to see the spiritual symptoms of the spiritual master. Jivan Mukta means that even though one is in the material body, there are still some material necessities since the body is material. But because one is fully situated in the service of the Lord, he should be understood to be liberated. Liberation entails being situated in one's own position. That is the definition in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Muktir Swarupena Vyavastiti. The Swarup or actual identity of the living entity, as described by Lord Chaitanya, Jivera Swarupoi Krishnara Nityadas. The real identity of the living entity is that he is eternally a servitor of the Supreme Lord. If someone is 100% engaged in the service of the Lord, he is to be understood as liberated. One must understand whether or not he is liberated by his activities in devotional service, not by other symptoms. 11. My dear mother, those who are actually transcendentalists certainly follow my instructions, as I have given them to you. You may rest assured that if you traverse this path of self-realization perfectly, surely you shall be freed from fearful material contamination and shall ultimately reach me. Mother, persons who are not conversant with this method of devotional service certainly cannot get out of the cycle of birth and death. Purport: material existence is full of anxiety, and therefore it is fearful. One who gets out of this material existence automatically becomes free from all anxieties and fear. One who follows the path of devotional service enunciated by Lord Kapila is very easily liberated. Maitreya said, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila, after instructing his beloved mother, took permission from her and left his home, his mission having been fulfilled. The mission of the appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of Kapila was to distribute the transcendental knowledge of Sankhya philosophy, which is full of devotional service. Having imparted that knowledge to his mother, and through his mother to the world, Kapila Dev had no more need to stay at home. So he took permission from his mother and left. Apparently he left home for spiritual realization, although he had nothing to realize spiritually because he himself is the person to be spiritually realized. Therefore, this is an example set by the Supreme Personality of Godhead while acting like an ordinary human being so that others might learn from him. He could, of course, have stayed with his mother, but he indicated that there was no need to stay with the family. It is best to remain alone as a brahmachari, sannyasi, or vanaprastha, and cultivate Krishna consciousness throughout one's whole life. Those who are unable to remain alone are given license to live in household life with wife and children, not for sense gratification, but for cultivation of Krishna consciousness. As instructed by her son, Devahuti also began to practice bhakti yoga in that very ashrama. She practiced samadhi in the house of Kardama Muni, which was so beautifully decorated with flowers that it was considered the flower crown of the river Saraswati. Purport: Devahuti did not leave her house because it is never recommended for a woman to leave her home. She is dependent. The very example of Devahuti was that when she was not married, she was under the care of her father, Swayambhuvamanu, and then Swayambhuvamanu gave her to Kardama Muni in charity. She was under the care of her husband in her youth, and then her son Kapila Muni was born. As soon as her son grew up, her husband left home, and similarly the son, after discharging his duty towards his mother, also left. She could also have left home, but she did not. Rather, she remained at home and began to practice bhakti yoga as it was instructed by her great son Kapila Muni. And because of her practice of bhakti yoga, the entire home became just like a flower crown on the river Saraswati. She began to bathe 3 times daily, and thus her curling black hair gradually became gray. Due to austerity, her body gradually became thin, and she wore old garments. Purport: is the practice of the yogi, brahmachari, vanaprastha, and sannyasi to bathe at least 3 times daily, early in the morning, during noontime, and in the evening. These principles are strictly followed even by some grihastas, especially brahmanas, who are elevated in spiritual consciousness. Devahuti was a king's daughter and almost a king's wife also. Although Kardama Muni was not a king, by his yogic mystic power, he accommodated Devahuti very comfortably in a nice palace with maidservants and all opulence. But since she had learned austerity, even in the presence of her husband, there was no difficulty for her to be austere. Still, because her body underwent severe austerity after the departure of her husband and son, she became thin. To be too fat is not very good for spiritually advanced life. Rather, one should reduce, because if one becomes fat, it is an impediment to progress in spiritual understanding. One should be careful not to eat too much, sleep too much, or remain in a comfortable position. Voluntarily accepting some penances and difficulties, one should take less food and less sleep. These are the procedures for practicing any kind of yoga, whether bhakti yoga, jnana yoga, or hatha yoga. The home and household paraphernalia of Kardama, who was one of the Prajapatis, was developed in such a way by dint of his mystic powers of austerity and yoga that his opulence was sometimes envied by those who travel in outer space in airplanes. The statement in this verse that Kardama Muni's household affairs were envied even by persons who travel in outer space refers to the denizens of heaven. Their airships are not like those we have invented in the modern age, which fly only from one country to another. Their airplanes were capable of going from one planet to another. There are many such statements in the Srimad Bhagavatam from which we can understand that there were facilities to travel from one planet to another, especially in the higher planetary system. And who can say that they are not still traveling? The speed of our airplanes and space vehicles is very limited. But as we have already studied, Kardama Muni traveled in outer space in an airplane which was like a city, and he journeyed to see all the different heavenly planets. That was not an ordinary airplane, nor was it ordinary space travel. Because Kardama Muni was such a powerful mystic yogi, his opulence was envied by the denizens of heaven. The opulence of the household of Kardama Muni is described herein. The bed sheets and mattresses were all as white as the foam of milk. The chairs and benches were made of ivory and were covered by cloths of lace with golden filigree, and the couches were made of gold and had very soft pillows. The walls of the house were made of first-class marble, decorated with valuable jewels. There was no need of light, for the household was illuminated by the rays of these jewels. The female members of the household were all amply decorated with jewelry. Purport is understood from this statement that the opulences of household life were exhibited in valuable jewels, ivory, first-class marble, and furniture made of golden jewels. The clothes are also mentioned as being decorated with golden filigree. Everything actually had some value. It was not like the furniture of the present day, which is cast in valueless plastic or base metal. The way of Vedic civilization is that whatever was used in household affairs had to be valuable. In case of need, such items of value could be exchanged immediately. Thus, one's broken and unwanted furniture and paraphernalia would never be without value. This system is still followed by Indians in household affairs. They keep metal utensils and golden ornaments, or silver plates and valuable silk garments with gold embroidery, and in case of need, they can have some money in exchange immediately. There are exchanges for the moneylenders and the householders. The compound of the main household was surrounded by beautiful gardens with sweet, fragrant flowers, and many trees which produced fresh fruit and were tall and beautiful. The attraction of such gardens was that singing birds would sit on the trees, and their chanting voices, as well as the humming sound of bees, made the whole atmosphere as pleasing as possible. When Devahuti would enter that lovely garden to take her bath in the pond filled with lotus flowers, the associates of the denizens of heaven, the Gandharvas, would sing about Kardama's glorious household life. Her great husband Kardama gave her all protection at all times. Purport: the ideal husband and wife relationship is very nicely described in this statement. Kardama Muni gave Devahuti all sorts of comforts in his duty as a husband, but he was not at all attached to his wife. As soon as his son Kapila Dev was grown up, Kardama at once left all family connection. Similarly, Devahuti was the daughter of a great king, Swayambhuva Manu, and was qualified and beautiful, but she was completely dependent on the protection of her husband. According to Manu, women, the fair sex, should not have independence at any stage of life. In childhood, a woman must be under the protection of the parents. In youth, she must be under the protection of the husband, and in old age, she must be under the protection of the grown children. Devahuti demonstrated all these statements of the Manu Samhita in her life. As a child, she was dependent on her father. Later, she was dependent on her husband, in spite of her opulence, and she was later on dependent on her son Kapila Dev. Although her position was unique from all points of view, saintly Devahuti, in spite of all her possessions, which were envied even by the ladies of the heavenly planets, gave up all such comforts. She was only sorry that her great son was separated from her. Devahuti was not at all sorry at giving up her material comforts, but she was very much aggrieved at the separation of her son. It may be questioned here that if Devahuti was not at all sorry to give up the material comforts of life, then why was she sorry about losing her son? Why was she so attached to her son? The answer is explained in the next verse. He was not an ordinary son. Her son was the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One can give up mutual attachment. One can give up material attachment, therefore, only when one has attachment for the Supreme Person. This is explained in Bhagavad-gītā, param drishva nivartate. Only when one actually has some taste for spiritual existence can he be reluctant to follow the materialistic way of life. Devahuti's husband had already left home and accepted the renounced order of life. And then her son her only son, Kapila, left home. Although she knew all the truths of life and death, and although her heart was cleansed of all dirt, she was very aggrieved at the loss of her son, just as a cow is affected when her calf dies. Purport: a woman whose husband is away from home or has taken the renounced order of life should not be very sorry, because she still has the presence of her husband's representative, her son. It is said in the Vedic scriptures, Atmaiva putro jayate, the husband's body is represented by the son. Strictly speaking, a woman is never widowed if she has a grown son. Devahuti was not very much affected while Kapila Muni was there, but upon his departure she was very afflicted. She grieved not because of her worldly relationship with Kardama Muni, but because of her sincere love for the personality of Godhead. The example given here is that Devahuti became just like a cow who has lost her calf. A cow bereft of her calf cries day and night. Similarly, Devahuti was aggrieved, and she always cried and requested her friends and relatives, "Please bring my son home so that I may live, otherwise I shall die." This intense affection for the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although manifested as affection for one's son, is spiritually beneficial. Attachment for a material son obliges one to remain in material existence, but the same attachment, when transferred to the Supreme Lord, brings one elevation to the spiritual world in the association of the Lord. Every woman can qualify herself as much as Devahuti, and then can also have the Supreme Godhead as her son. If the Supreme Personality of Godhead can appear as the son of Devahuti, he can also appear as the son of any other woman, provided that woman is qualified. If one gets the Supreme Lord as a son, one can have the benefit of bringing up a nice son in this world, and at the same time get promotion to the spiritual world to become the face-to-face associate of the Personality of Godhead. O Vidura thus always meditated upon her son, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Kapila Dev. She very soon became unattached to her nicely decorated home. Purport: here is a practical example of how one can elevate oneself in spiritual advancement by Krishna consciousness. Kapila Dev is Krishna, and he appeared as the son of Devahuti. After Kapila Dev left home, Devahuti was absorbed in thought of him, and thus she was always Krishna conscious. Her constant situation in Krishna consciousness enabled her to be detached from hearth and home. Unless we are able to transfer our attachment to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, there is no possibility of becoming freed from material attachment. The Srimad Bhagavatam therefore confirms that it is not possible for one to become completely liberated, by cultivation of empiric philosophical speculation. Simply knowing that one is not matter, but spirit, soul, or Brahman, does not purify one's intelligence. Even if the impersonalist reaches the highest platform of spiritual realization, he falls down again to material attachment because of not being situated in the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. The devotees adopt the devotional process, hearing about the Supreme Lord's pastimes and glorifying his activities, and thereby always remembering his beautiful eternal form. By rendering service, becoming his friend, or his servant, and offering him everything that one possesses, one is able to enter into the kingdom of God. As it is said in Bhagavad-gītā, tato tattvato jñātvā. After discharging pure devotional service, one can understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in fact, and thus one becomes eligible to enter into his association in one of the spiritual planets. Dear Srila Prabhupada, dear Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, dear Lord Kapila Dev, dear Devahuti, if you so desire, please empower us to embrace the teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam and be fully situated in pure devotional service. Thank you for considering our requests. Om Tat Sat. Everyone agrees with this prayer in whole or in part. Please unmute and say Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Gaur Premanande. Nitya Gaura Hari Bo. Hari Bo. Haribo, Nitai Gaura Haribo, Nitai Gaura Haribo, 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Vanchakalpaduruscha kripasindhaveva cha patitanam pavanibhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha.